Cerro Torre is a climber's mountain. You have to be a good climber to get up Cerro Torre. There's no two ways around it. I love that there's no easy way up Cerro Torre.
There isn't even an easy way back down. Like once you get up there, you're still screwed. It's like getting up
Right?
Cerro Torre is heinous. Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So I had read about the compressor out and I'd seen some photos and I'm like, well, yeah, okay, so there's a few bolt ladders here and there, like it sounds like the guy went a little overboard. But when I saw it on the way down, I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. And I was actually filled with like this like weird, almost like crazy admiration for Maestri, just in terms of his maniacal obsession. Holy shit. And you're standing on the engine block, this 150-pound engine block that is the compressor itself by Atlas Copco, the industrial equipment company that sponsored his trip there in 1970. You're standing on it at one of the belays, like a mile off the Torre Glacier, just everything dropping away beneath your feet. And then you start wrapping down, and the just like obsession that guy had, like what a maniac at that point in time. Like he was completely ignoring all natural features and just like raw, like man, oh man, like those are not the values that I admire in climbing mountains, but holy shit. But if you're talking like pure commitment and obsession and devotion, I mean, you kind of got to give guy a little bit of credit for that. But so in early 1970, Carlo Mori had returned, I believe it was with Benatti again, from trying the West Face, and that's when he says, we returned safe and sound from the impossible Cerro Torre. And then that headline ran in a big newspaper in Italy. And that headline apparently threw Maestri into a rage because there had been some simmering doubts, it sounded like. Some of the rumor mill people basically doubting Maestri, which didn't go over too well with him, I guess, given his defiant attitude. And then when that headline ran, that is what seemed to drive Maestri into a rage. And that's when he made plans to return later in 1970. Yeah, so he returned once in early 1970, and then I think his final compressor route was December 1970. But he got sponsorship from an industrial equipment company, and supposedly he returned.
Another way in which he was well ahead of his time.
Yes,
He's like
indeed,
very
indeed.
sponsored climber.
Very sponsored climber. Atlas Copco, the industrial equipment company that sponsored the compressor route expeditions. When the conversion at the time of my book, which was published in 2014, in 2014 dollars, it was the equivalent of $300,000 sponsorship
Whoa.
money. So,
So he's doing way
it's
better than
quite a
any
bit more.
modern professional climber. I'm like, come on,
Right.
that's like
Yeah.
next level. Imagine getting some random compressor manufacturer
Right.
to sponsor your trip for 300
I
grand.
know. I know. Oh my
You're like,
God.
geez, Louise.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really something.
Can
Yeah.
you sort of recap the 1970 expedition again briefly? Well, or let
Yeah.
me try. So
Yeah. Yeah.
they tackled the Southeast Ridge. They did climb a lot of it, some of it, particularly at the bottom, and then proceeded to just bolt straight up the rest of the face.
Right.
And this is the part of the face that particularly looks like a candlestick. It really does look like a vertical tower sticking straight out
Yes.
of the glacier. And so as the tower gets more vertical and more skinny towards the top, that's where he just went hog wild with that compressor and just
Yeah.
started spraying bolts up the wall.
Right. Right. No
But
regard for natural features. I mean, you're like, well, there's like a good hand crack right there, and you could easily just kind of link that up to this and there. I mean, it eventually went at like 510 A2. I mean, that's a grade that climbers were certainly capable of climbing in that day.
it like but why? You're like why not climb? It's just weird because drilling bolts is more
Right.
work than climbing 510
Yeah.
hand crack. And particularly in a place like Patagonia where weather windows are so scarce and so precious, like why would you waste the time drilling straight up the wall when you could
Yeah.
just climb around it?
He seemed enraged. Some of the quotes from him just seemed to point at this like this dueling mix of like anger and resentment and whatever sorts of personal baggage he brought there with him, rage, but also mixed with. But he also didn't seem immune to the natural beauty of the place. There's a beautiful line that he wrote upon waking from one of his bivvies. Okay, he's talking about like the day breaks forth in all its glory, sweeping away the ghosts of fear of the night, or something like that. It's like, wow, that's really beautiful, man. And then he fires up the motor engine and jackhammers away. Like, Jesus, wow. Yeah, I think the guy was complicated.
And so, how did people react to the compressor route?
Yeah. Most of the world was fairly unimpressed. But he returned to Italy once again as a hero with parades in his honor. So,
Imagine if
yeah,
he'd actually made it to the top. Would he have even bigger
right.
parade? Like,
Well, he told everyone he made it to the top. So,
how is it that the second time in 1970 he still got away with not having any pictures from the summit or not having any photos on or anything?
right.
Like, I mean, how is it that he could claim the summit twice with no evidence?
Because we believe what we want to believe. That's as old as humankind. Yep,
I mean, it's so weird. The
it
compressor
is.
route I never quite understood
So
because I'm
weird.
like, if you're drilling a bolt ladder, but then the bolt ladder stops below the top, doesn't that mean you probably didn't go to the top?
Right. One would think.
Like,
Here's the whole thing about it, though, Alex. Like with both 1959 and 1970, like who the fuck is ever gonna know? That's the thing about lies. You never know how the future might betray you. You
mm-hmm.
can't see into the future. In 1959, dude, I mean, who in their right mind could possibly even imagine the way it is today? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not even close, right? So, I mean, it was an expedition of unfathomable proportions. Just there's probably no place on Earth today that is harder to reach than Patagonia was in 1959. And and so who's ever going to know from 1959? And not that much changed from 1959 to 1970. I mean, yeah, they probably maybe they flew to Buenos Aires instead of taking a boat to South America, but not I don't really remember, but the not that much has changed. It is still incredibly remote. I mean, nobody goes there. Nobody.
And
Who's ever gonna know?
so then what happened in 1974 with the first ascent of the West Face?
Yes, the Ragni D'Lecco team in Italy. So Cerro Torre and Patagonia had become an obsession with Italian climbers, and the there are all these competing factions within Italy. So a lot of this is like a Appalachian family dynamics or something. I grew up in Appalachia, so I'm allowed to say it. It's like everybody's infighting, and the only thing worse than the infighting is if somebody else tries to come in, and then everybody gangs up and it's like fuck you, you know. So within Italy, there's all this competition, and then the Ragni D'Lecco team, which is the Lecco spiders, the famed Lecco spiders. I mean, that's what like Benatti and Carlo Mori and that camp was from. That's different from where Maestri was up in the Trentino region. And the 1974 team, led by Casimiro Ferrari, great climber, they went down there and launched this big siege expedition up the west face and climbed what was for a long time people call it the Ferrari route, aka the west face route, aka the Ragni route or Ragni D'Lecco route. So that's the route up the west face, and it's now properly known as the true first ascent of Cerro Torre. So Maestri had basically claimed credit for something that he didn't actually do, and there was all this
And he
competition
claimed it
within
twice.
Italy. Yeah, and he claimed it twice.
You're like to claim a fraudulent first ascent twice. You're like, come on.
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
That's pretty
exactly.
next level.
Yeah. The guy was determined.
But so when the Ragni D'Lecco made it to the summit of Cerro Torre for the
Yeah.
first time,
Yes.
did that change anybody's perception of what Maestri had done, or did it even matter?
I'm not sure. I think it depends on who was doing the thinking. It didn't change anything among Maestri supporters. The thing is, among Maestri supporters who were mostly entrenched in the Trentino region, this wasn't just a climb. I mean, this represented something far greater for them. You know, as as the world was changing after the Great Wars and everybody's clinging to their points of pride, planting their flag atop the world's highest mountains. Soon we had the space race, and then it gets into the Cold War and all that. But up in this kind of backwater area, the Trentino province. It's this like kind of autonomous region up in northern Italy. And suddenly they had their own hero. I mean, you don't just let go of that. That starts to represent something among the people. He starts to become their hero. So people don't easily change their minds about their heroes when confronted with just a little bit of evidence contrary to what they want to believe.